I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker. John Reeb is the president of the Colorado Leadership Institute. Born in Colorado to a Lutheran family, John is a PK, a pastor's kid. He was educated in the Lutheran school system, graduating from Concordia University, Seward. John, I'm hearing some, ooh, you got some Seward folks in here? John earned his doctorate degree in ministry leadership. He previously worked as a programmer analyst and IT professional. A former employee says of John that he was always involved, upbeat, and outspoken. John started the Colorado Leadership Institute in 2011, where he trains businesses in strategic skills for management and leadership at all levels. I, along with the board of directors, had the pleasure and the blessing of meeting John 2 years ago as he led us to determine our leadership styles through getting to know ourselves better. Please join me in welcoming John Reeb.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So, two things before we really get started here. First of all, being in the heart of St. Louis, I just appreciate it so much that you choose Colorado Rockies colors, the purple and silver, to welcome me. And I see we have some Bronco fans too, with the orange and blue. So, second thing is, this is a 2-hour session. This is right after lunch. So, I'm not taking a break, but you may need to. So feel free, if you have to take a biology break and do what you have to if there's such a need for that. So today's topic is all about change. So, the Choluteca Bridge in Honduras. It was built in 1930 originally, and in 1996, the government of Honduras said, we need to have a much better bridge. And so they built a bridge to withstand hurricanes and anything that could come along. And they were successful. They built that bridge in 1996. In 1998, Hurricane Mitch, as a Category 1 hurricane, came on shore in Honduras and then ended up dumping roughly 73 inches of rain in the mountains around Choluteca. All right? This bridge was amazing. It withstood everything. But do you think that there might be a problem? So here's my question for you, and we're going to do this several times today, so kind of get used to it. In groups of 2 or 3 at your tables, not a full table talk, just 2s and 3s, just kind of pair off or maybe get in 3s. I want you to answer this question. How's the church and the LWML like or not like the Choluteca Bridge? So think about that talk. I'm going to give you maybe 5 minutes. Go for it. All right, let's come up. Let's just have a couple of people shout out what are some ways that the Choluteca Bridge is like the LWML? Strong. What else? Sometimes we miss the mark. Built on the rock. I heard God changed the channel here. What was that? Great foundation. Okay. Just in the wrong place. Good intentions. Very good. They need to expand their horizons. All right. So how is it not like? How is it unlike the Choluteca? Oh, you had a...
Well, I was just going to say, if we're not intentional in our planning, we'll miss the mark in what the bridge was intended to do for us.
Okay. If you're not intentional in your planning, we'll miss the mark in what it's intended. Okay? So how's it not like?
Unapproachable.
Unapproachable? Unapproachable.
We actually are aware that there's something that can change. The bridge can't change.
Okay, yeah, we're aware the bridge can't change itself, right?
No values.
No value? That's of no value, right? It's not purple. All right? So, the one thing I didn't hear, just to make it clear, because that's what a lot of the rest of this is going to be, and that is the river has moved. The river has moved. And that's important for us to remember that what we might have grown up with is not the same today. The river has moved. All right, with that in mind, I love this quote. If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance a lot less. All right? So, by the way, there you have a worksheet at your table. It looks something like this, and it is in the order that I'm going to be talking. The idea is for you to not only take notes, but I'm going to have breakouts where, just like this multiple times, where go ahead and write down things that you hear, that you think, that other people say, so that you can keep track of what we're talking about here. Let's continue on. So why is thinking about this important? I just mentioned it, because the river has moved, all right? Also, here's some interesting data that came from the Gallup organization. They did a study in 1973 about confidence in institutions. Now, there's a whole lot more institutions that they put in here. I just selected a few, all right? So in 1973, the year I graduated from high school, organized religion and church, you notice 65% confidence in institutions. In 2018, when they did this study again, that number's 38%. Do you think the last 2 months with what's happened in the Catholic Church has had an impact on that number? All right. Do you think people out there look at us any different than how they look at the Catholic Church? Probably not. If they don't know us, they look at us the same. So my guess is if they would do that survey today, it would be even a lower number, and the very little or none would be a much higher number. Don't know, but that's the latest stats, okay? Interestingly, look at the military. 73, what was happening then? Vietnam, right? The year before my draft number came up, my number would have been number 5. The year I turned 18, it was 360. So I wasn't worried about being drafted. But look at it now, today. People love our military. A lot different today. Good thing. But I just wanted to point that out to you. All right? This is why, now the next question is, why do you think it has dropped so much? Well, scandals have been one thing, and there's probably lots of other reasons. But I think there is a very specific reason, and it relates to this quote from George Orwell. By the way, he wrote 1984. He wrote Animal Farm. You guys are familiar with George Orwell. Look at this quote. Each generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it, and wiser than the one that comes after it. Think back to when you were 14. What did you think of with your parents? All right? You're way more intelligent than your parents when you're 14, right? Now think of the 14-year-olds you know. I'm so much wiser than they are, right? This is such a true statement. But why is that the case? Because every generation changes. We're going to talk about generations a little bit because it has an impact on change. So first of all, I've identified the last 4 generations that we are experiencing now. I'm not going to talk about the silent generation. It's going to start with the boomers. I want you to notice the years that I have down for these. Now, different people who do generations will put down different ideas as far as what the years are. Generally, these are acceptable. I do want to point out, though, 2 of them, the millennials and iGen, or Gen Y. We call them iGen for a reason. Notice that we ended in 1995 for millennials. There are some people that say millennials were still being born in 2005, all right? We make it 1995. When we talk about why their generation, you'll understand that a little better. What that means is when you hear people saying that the millennials in college today, and I'm going to tell you, millennials are not in college today. The last class of millennials graduated about 2 years ago. We are now in the iGen generation. They are the ones in college and graduating. Now, I'm not talking about adult people here, the adult going back to college. I'm talking about your typical 18 to 22-year-olds, all right? I just want to make that crystal clear so that millennials are no longer in college. We now have iGen coming into the workforce, coming into buildings, beginning families, that sort of a thing. It's a different generation. Now, with this knowledge so far, again, groups of 2 or 3, I want you to describe the characteristics of each generation. What that means is you say boomers. What are some characteristics of boomers? Write down some of them. I've gave you some columns there to write down just a few ideas. Don't write sentences, write words. What are boomers like? What are Xers like? What are millennials like? And what's iGen like? Begin. Let's go ahead and review some of these. By the way, most of the time when I teach this, I keep the times a little shorter. And my wife said to me, "You're talking to a bunch of women. You can't keep it that short." So, okay. So, anyway, boomers. What were some of the things you came up with or characteristics of boomers? What was it? Hardworking, I heard? Dedicated? Would you? Traditional? Volunteers. What was this? Strong values. Financially conscious. Raised by Christian families. Less open to change. Wow, what an, gee, maybe we should talk about that. What was that?
Technology adverse.
Technology adverse, okay? Loyal. What? Largest? They're actually not the largest anymore. But rebellious, okay? All right, so we've got some for boomers. Hopefully you took some notes of things you heard that you hadn't heard before. Now let's go to Xers. That's a generation beginning roughly 1961.
I call them the Jan Brady of generation.
The what?
Jan Brady.
Jan Brady. I love Jan. No, it's Marcia. That was who I liked. But yeah, Jan Brady. Okay, what else? Materialistic. Adaptable. Less committed, didn't respect authority. Okay, what? More work-life balance? Yeah, more work-life balance, okay? Mistrust of institutions, okay? All right, let's go to millennials.
Globally minded.
Globally minded. Are you a millennial? Environmentally conscious? I'm hearing from millennials. I need to hear from some other. Networkers? Entitled? What? Minimalists? Loyal? Anything else? Tech savvy.
Independent, I don't know how to phrase it the right way. There's a lot of freelancers in millennials.
Okay, freelancers.
Yeah, they don't go into
Problem with authority. Loyal, qualifying loyal, if you are proven worthy. Okay? Let's go to iGen. So that's the generation they're just the first 2 years of it, graduate from college. Let's talk about them. What? Entitled again.
optimistic about tech,
Optimistic about what?
technology,
About technology.
ambitious
Ambitious, but in a pessimistic way. That's interesting. Immediate gratification? Me, myself, and I?
Lazy though, because they want everything, they want it easy, quick, and don't want to have to work too hard.
Okay, the word was lazy because they wanted easy, quick.
They're very socially conscious.
Socially conscious?
I would say they're technology dependent.
Technology dependent. That's a different way of looking at it. Sheltered. Peer driven. What was that? Disposably minded. Speak a different language. Non-relational face-to-face. Faux self-esteem. Go two more. Skeptical and they like to make a difference. All right. Good. Great ideas out there. So here's the question. Can we agree that many of those characteristics are stereotypes? Yes. Are stereotypes wrong? The correct answer is it depends. All right? Sometimes stereotypes take it to the extreme, but sometimes they're spot on. Going through the course of this, some of you said very accurate stereotype, but it's very accurate, and others were more on the extremes of every one of these groups. All right? We're going to talk more about that as we continue today. Here's what I want you to do right now. What was your life like when you were little? And little is being defined broadly. So when you were even grade school, high school-ish, what was your life like? What event? So what you want to do is find the number that corresponds most closely to you. The events, World War II, Korean War, etc. Music. Did you grow up with Sinatra, with Presley, with the Beatles, with the Bee Gees, with Madonna, with Nirvana, or with Beyonce? And parenting. Did your mother send you to the store alone? Did you play in the street? Did you ride your bike everywhere in town? Were you given a house key? Okay, sometimes houses were never locked. Went to childcare? Did your mom hover? Or did they say, you figure it out? I'm not going to make anybody raise their hands, but I want you to think about which of those numbers most closely corresponds to you from 1 through 7. Just think about that, right? That kind of identifies that what I tried to pick here was decades, all right? So like 40 to 50, 50 to 60, et cetera. That's what I tried to pick out here to get some of the things. I don't know if you know this, but they've done a study. The music you listen to between the ages of 12 and 18 is the music that you typically love all of your life. You don't like anything older than that, and you don't like anything newer than that, all right? Now, I will say this. When I was growing up, I absolutely despised country music. Hank Williams and those, they just drove me nuts. I actually kind of like country music today. Carrie Underwood, Brad Paisley, I love those kinds of music now. But that's unusual to like something that you didn't like when you were between 12 and 18 years of old, okay? So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and define some generations a little bit. First of all, generations are a group of people born about the same time that experience the same economy. That can mean it's going up, it's going down, whatever. They experience the same thing. By the way, when we say that grow up at the same time, we're primarily talking kind of upper elementary through about high school. That's the age where this impression really hits people. So that's kind of what's going on. One more thing I want to make clear. Those dates I gave you, people that were born within 3 years either side of that boundary are called cusp babies. That means they tend to have features of both generations, the one after and the one before. My son is a perfect example. He's a millennial, but he's a cusp baby, and he has a lot of exer tendencies that I can see in him, all right? But he's technically a millennial. He has a lot of millennial tendencies as well, but But as you whereas my daughter is really into the millennial, and she is a millennial. There's no question about that, okay? So they experience the same economy. By the way, just so you know, for the last week, I've been fighting a chest cough, and so you're gonna hear my voice kind of do funny things, and I'll be coughing every now and then. So please bear with me. They experience the same parental trends. Raise your hand if you have heard of Dr. Spock, and we're not talking about Star Trek. Okay? There are a few people who have not heard of Dr. Spock, okay? He wrote a book in the 60s, I couldn't tell you which year, on parenting. Now, my dad was a Lutheran pastor, and he despised Dr. Spock, all right? But that being said, a lot of people use Dr. Spock's book to guide their parenting. When he was in his 90s, which was roughly in the 1990s, I don't remember the exact year, he actually came out and said, I wish I'd never written that book. I ruined a whole generation, all right? That was his view. On the other hand, some of you grow up and read Dr. Dobson's books, all right? Whole different thing, right? All right, he had a different way of parenting. Parental trends matter. Educational trends. When I grew up, I had to learn multiplication tables, addition tables, division tables. I had to learn all of that kind of stuff. I was a math major in college, all right? Then, when I started teaching, I taught in Lutheran schools for about 8 years. When I was teaching, this thing called new math came up. I'm like, what do you mean new math? 2 plus 2 is always 4. I don't care when you talk about it, it's always 4. But new math was something, and I don't know what they do today. I don't think I could teach it. I have no clue. But educational trends matter. And finally, technology. And we're going to talk more about that as we go through, so I'm not going to spend any time on it right now. But those things form a generation. You can start understanding why hopefully as you're hearing this, you can start saying, that's why iGen is different than millennials. And they are much different than millennials, believe it or not. So, what's a generation? Let's talk about boomers first. Excuse me. Boomers are optimistic. Why are they optimistic? What was happening during their childhood? What was the economy doing? It was just booming. It was exploding. It was post-World War II, and they were moving to the suburbs. People could afford homes. It was just booming. So boomers tend to be very optimistic. They expected to do better than their parents, and they expected their children to do better than them. There's some other things there, but I want to go to organizational loyalty. A friend of mine just retired about 6 years ago now from GM. He graduated from college, went to work for General Motors, and he never left and retired from that company, okay? What did boomers expect when they retired? They didn't expect a pension. A gold watch. That was retirement. I got that gold watch, right? Now, pensions started coming into play about then, but there were other reasons for that, right? But they didn't expect it, especially the early ones. Maybe later, like I'm a boomer, so maybe later I expected it, but not the early ones, okay? And they're driven. They knew that I go to work, I put in my 8 hours, I work hard, and maybe I'll put in 10, 12 hours, work hard, and I'm going to climb the corporate ladder, and the company will take care of me, okay? Those are boomers. Xers. Xers are really the skeptical bunch. Why are they skeptical? Because their parents started losing jobs, all right? Globalization started coming into play when the Xers were growing up. We're starting to talk about the 70s here. Globalization was coming in, which meant that jobs were moving offshore, beginning to happen. Their parents were losing jobs. So now they became skeptical. That loyalty, that bond of loyalty that boomers expected was beginning to be broken, right? Just because you expected something doesn't mean you got it, by the way. But that was how they grew up, okay? They are efficient. Why are they efficient? Because that's when the personal computer started becoming real, or computers at work became real. And so they learned to think, I'll call it faster, because they had this technology at their fingertips. Now, we didn't have an internet yet, but we had computers, right? And they're independent. How many of you, any Xers here, did you go to childcare? And the answer is no, because there was no such thing as childcare when they were growing up. The only childcare you might have had was your grandma who lived down the street, or maybe an aunt or a family friend who would watch you during the day. Xers were the first to really have their moms go to work. Now, moms went to work during World War II, et cetera, but then they all kind of came back from the workforce. It was in the time when Xers were growing up that moms were going back into the workforce. And so they became independent. You've heard that, some of you have heard the term latchkey kids, all right? That's from the Xers, because their parents gave them a key to come home, unlock the door, go in, make their snack, do their homework. You know, theoretically, when their homework's done, you can go out and play, maybe even make their dinner, because the mom and dad would get home sooner or later, all right? It was out of that that childcare came about, because somebody said, I could make money doing this for people, and started the business, all right? So that's why Xers are independent. They grew up that way. Next is millennials. First word I have up there is they're urgent. Why are they urgent? Because when they were growing up, things like 9/11 happened, the first World Trade Center bombing, terrorism, Columbine. Those things happened during those formative years for millennials. So life has become more urgent for them. They're more collaborative. Why are they collaborative? Because when they were growing up, when we were going on vacation, my dad said, okay, we get our annual 2-week vacation, and this is where we're going, and this is what we're gonna do. Okay, Dad, we all hopped in a car, we drove and did the thing, all right? For millennials, it was, okay, family, let's all get together. We're gonna vote on where everybody wants to go. Everybody had an equal say. Dad didn't just say, this is where we're going. It was, let's take a vote. Is it Disney World? Is it Disneyland? Is it wherever, okay? They expect you to involve them in decision making. Millennials expect that because they grew up with that, all right? I should point out one thing as I looked at a couple of millennials. These are generalizations, right? Not every family was brought up this way, right? But generally speaking, this is what a millennial is like. So when you look at the whole, this is kind of what it is, okay? They're impatient. I specifically use the word impatient here instead of the word entitled.
Thank you.
Entitled implies I get what I don't deserve. Impatient means I know this, how come you're not promoting me, or how come you're not moving me ahead? They know far more technology than Xers and boomers do, and yet they have to work for a boomer who doesn't even know how to turn on their laptop, all right? That's the idea of being impatient. They also got things much more quickly. The internet was coming about as they were growing up. So they are used to getting things quickly. So they're impatient about getting things quickly. But does not mean they feel entitled. So that's a bit of a stereotype that I'm trying to get rid of here. They want work-life integration. Notice that above I had work-life balance for Xers. I didn't really talk about it. Xers were like, results are what you should be looking for. I don't need to be here 9 to 5. If I get my work done early, I want to go home because my kid is in a soccer game tonight and I'm going to do that, all right? They want that balance. Millennials want integration. What's the difference? And to a millennial, that means I'll get the work done. I may work from 8 to 10 and then go do something because a friend of mine is doing a show over lunch down someplace. I'm going to go watch them. And I'll come back and I might be back at 4, but I'll work and get it done, which means I may be up till 2 a.m. doing my work. But I want to work when I want to work. Now, if you're in construction industry, that's not a good thing, all right? You got to kind of work when you're building the building, all right? But there's a lot of jobs that they really, honestly, don't need to be around. They want to do what they want to do when they want to do it. It's not a bad thing, it's just different. They work just as hard. Every one of these groups has hard workers in it, so don't think in terms that some are lazy. And they want impactful work. This kind of goes back to the urgent. Bad things happened, and so now they look at it and say, I'm not going to do as well as my parents, so what I do, I want it to make a difference. I want you to think about how that can be something that you can use for LWML when you're trying to reach that group. They want impactful work. What's more impactful than what you guys are trying to do or what your gals are trying to do, all right? Think about tying that in. That's what they're looking for, an impact to society, to the world, to the culture. That's what they're looking for. Let's go to iGen. We know less about them just because they haven't been out long enough to really kind of know, but we do know they're resilient. Why are they resilient? Look at when they were born and look at what happened when they were in that late elementary school, high school age. What happened? Well, 9/11 was actually pretty early in their life, so they don't really remember that too much. To them, 9/11 is like Pearl Harbor is to many of us. It's something that's in the history book, all right? What else happened? Yeah, 2008 happened. What happened when 2008 happened? A ton of jobs were gone. A ton of money was gone. So now this group knew that their parents were out of work and their parents were moving to find work. So they became resilient because they were used to having to move to find work, make new friends, all of that, okay? They're resourceful. Because of that, they had to learn how do I deal with this? I'm in a new school, how do I make friends? And they became resourceful in that. They want meaningful work. It's a little different than impactful work, but they're very closely related. It needs to be meaningful work, meaning to help. Maybe that's because I'm going under something here, okay? All of these people are good, hard workers. By the way, iGen is actually more polite than we've seen in a while. You'll start hearing them say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, more often than you will, like millennials, for example, and Xers, okay? Anybody here from Texas? Okay, I lived in Texas for 8 years. We could not believe how polite kids were in Texas. It was just, we were like, this is amazing. We moved from Denver and came down to Texas, and I don't know, I loved going to restaurants, being called honey and sugar. Oh, loved it. All right, so let's keep moving. Let's go to the communication and technology here, all right? As you see it, the preferred communication for boomers is telephone and face-to-face. Face-to-face is the preferred, telephone is second. That's what boomers are looking for. They're very good at it. Technology growing up, the rotary dial phone. Anybody else here ever have a party line? Who has no clue what I'm talking about when I say a party line? So, yeah, the party line was wonderful. Back then, if you recall, long-distance calls cost a fortune. So it just so happened that we lived out in the country in Nebraska at this time, and my brother lived in town and my sister lived in town with their families. They lived a block away. It just so happened that they were on the same party line. So my dad would call one of them. They'd send their kid across the backyards to the other and say, hey, Grandma and Grandpa are on the phone, and they'd pick up and we could have a nice conference call just because they were on the same party line. So And some of you are saying, long distance cost? Yeah. They got the TV, and they got this newfangled thing called a calculator. They didn't have a slide rule anymore. I bought my first calculator in 1973 because I was going to college, going to be a math major. I bought my calculator. Any guesses how much it cost? It did sine and cosine and all that. How much? 50. You got good. 120. $900. I paid $900 for a statistical calculator. All right? You can go to an Office Depot today and buy that for less than $10, and you can go online and get it for free. Probably on your phone. I know it's on your phone for free. All right? So, all right, let's go on to Xers. They prefer email and text as a communication device. Why? Because that's what they kind of grew up with. Texting really wasn't around when they were young, but now, they latched onto it. Email was around, it just wasn't the internet email we know. It was the intercorporate email, okay? They had the touch tone phone. That was a big invention in those days, all right? The pager. Has anybody seen a pager in the last 10 years? You have? Doctors still have pagers. That's amazing to me, okay? And then the word processor. The typewriter was making way for the word processor. This was not a computer, it was a word processor. Now we go on to millennials. Instant messaging and text are their preferred communication. The technology they got was the desktop computer, the cell phone, and the internet. That's when the internet was really taking off. All right, so that's their preferred communication and technology. And then finally, the iGen. Again, text and social media. However, social media is not what you think. If you're thinking Facebook, both millennials and iGen are not on Facebook. How come? Yeah, their parents are on. They're not about to let their parents see what they're doing, okay? They use other things like Snapchat and Instagram, and that's something I cannot keep up with. I have no idea, okay? And again, texting, all right? Technology, the tablet, the iPod, the iPhone, hence the name iGen, all right? So that's the smartphone. Remember, millennials grew up with a cell phone. iGen's growing up with a smartphone. It's different. And then social media, again, we talked about, okay? So thinking about this, what does this tell you with regards to you communicating to the other generations? And I don't care which generations you're in, what does it tell you about communicating with them? What was that? Okay, it's hard to communicate across, and you have to think about it differently. So if use whatever you can use. So if you're a millennial and you need to talk to a boomer about something, what don't you do? or text them, all right? You try to either call them or better yet, get face-to-face with them, right? You'll be far more successful. If you're a boomer and you're trying to get the young women in your church to join, do you call them? No, they look at, I don't know that number, and they're not going to answer. What do? Text them. So a youth leader I knew said that when he would have an event, he would email all of the people, all the kids, and say, hey, who's all coming to the thing tonight or tomorrow? And maybe one or two would answer him. He started doing group texts, and within 5 minutes, he would hear from almost every single one of them, at least a yes or no, so he knew what to expect, all right? It's up to you to communicate with people the way they need to be communicated with, all right? You can't think of, well, this is how I do it. It's got to be, how do they want it? That's how you have to think about it. This can be useful to you. Let's keep going here. I want to see if I'm running out of time yet. So what does any of this have to do with change? Isn't it seem like just just when you get things all lined up, you've got the wagon circled, you know how to handle the situation, they go and change the damn dad blame rules, all right? You can't sit there and say, you can't do that. You need to adjust, all right? And that's what the rest of us is going to be. I want everybody now, put your papers down, want everybody to stand up and pair off with somebody and then listen as I give directions. Just pair off with somebody. Just pair off. Anybody around you. If you don't know them, just introduce yourself real quickly. All right, okay, you're going to have to listen. Here's the rules. I want you to stand face to face, and you're going to check each other out, how you look, how you're dressed. Check each other out. I'm giving you 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Check each other out. Just jump in with the group. Just jump in with the group.
Okay. Hi, Susan.
Do you need?
I'm
No.
Michelle. I met her earlier. I'm Jane. Hi.
All right. Now, I want you, listen carefully, listen carefully. You're going to stand back to back so you're not looking at each other, don't touch each other, and each person change 5 things about your appearance. 5 things about your appearance. Back to back. Back to back so you don't see. 5 things. No, your own self. 5 things about your appearance. Each of you do this. Only giving you a few seconds. Don't talk about it, just do it. Don't touch each other. 5 things. Everybody done that? Finish up here real quick. All right. So now turn around and face each other and try and identify the 5 things that were changed. Okay? All right. Turn yourself back to back. Turn yourself back to back. Turn yourself back to back. Change 5 more things. If you've done it, go ahead and turn face to face. Identify the 5 changes. Turn yourself back to back. Now you can sit down. So what did we learn about change? What did we learn about change? So we're going to talk about several things here about change. First of all, for some of you, this was very awkward, uncomfortable, and you were self-conscious. Especially if you're on an outer edge where your back was to everybody else, you might have been thinking, am I the only one that's doing this? Is everybody else in on the joke? Right? Okay? But many of you were feeling a bit awkward. You might have felt alone. Like, again, those people on the edge, you might have felt alone on it, okay? Most of you took something off. You focused on loss, not gain. All right? Well, yeah. So, I didn't give you any rules. You could have just grabbed a glass of water and held it in your hand, right? You could have added something, okay? Many of you are concerned about resources. If we had to do it a 3rd time, you would have been like, oh, this is getting weird, okay? There was a different level of change readiness. Some of you were like, you know, oh, this is fun. Others of you are like, really? You know, what's this guy doing, okay? Many of you got more creative over time. The second time, if I did a third time, you're ready to go. Say, oh, I just thought of something else, right? You get more creative over time. But a whole bunch of you, the second time we did it, just put back on the things you took off the first time, didn't you? All right? You just went back to what you had before. Those are normal feelings of change. Those are normal feelings of change. Think about that for you personally and for the people that you work with. So, real quickly, again, at your tables, I'm only going to do about 2 minutes on this one. What? You want to go back? Okay. By the way, while some people are writing here, raise your hand if you love change. So there's a few, right? I'm one, I love change. The people at my church get tired of me because I never want us to do it twice the same way. It's always, I'm always about change. What can we change? All right? We kind of caught up here? Yeah. Every one of you has a camera. You know that, don't you? And then I can, if Debbie wants me to, I can make these slides available in a PowerPoint. Does that work? Okay. Okay, why do people resist change? Just 2 minutes on this one. Again, groups of 2 or 3, list reasons why people resist change. It could be why you resist change or why you think other people resist change. And things that you're experiencing now or have in the past. Just 2 minutes, go. We'll just get a couple of answers out there, not very many, just 2 or 3. What's one reason? Fear. Fear loss. What else? What? Lack of control. If it's working, why change it? Okay? Yeah. It takes effort. All right? One more. Okay, if you need to change, it's because you did something wrong. All right? So.
Maybe they don't understand the goal. They haven't communicated the goal.
Okay, you don't understand the goal. Okay? All of your answers can fit into one of 4 categories. And that's what we're going to talk about now, and there's space on your sheet to write them. The first one is, and this is probably the most likely, is they don't perceive the change to be beneficial. They don't believe the change is going to be good. All right? So think about that in terms of, you want to change what? Why? This is good enough. It kind of fits into that category. Why do we need to change? What you're doing isn't going to be any better than what we're doing now. All right? A second reason, they don't perceive the sacrifice to be worth the benefits. In other words, what do I have to do to get that change? Here's an example. Let's say that you work at some company and they tell you, I am going to double your salary. And you're saying, that's great. What's your first question? What do I have to do? All right? Said, what we're going to do is we're going to put you in the basement where there are no windows and you're going to do data input all day long. So for some of you, it would be, cool, I can do that for double the salary. And others of you are going to say, that's just not worth it to me. That sacrifice of not being around people and doing a boring job is just not worth it to me. So they don't perceive the sacrifice to be worth the benefits. Next, they didn't help create the change. They were not part of the change process. And if any of you have worked in a corporation, you understand this one. This is what we're changing, do it. And you're not a part of it at all, right? You're not a part. And it's harder when you're not a part. You didn't help create the change. And finally, they don't trust the architects of the change. They don't trust the people who say this needs to be changed. So very quickly, how to address these things. First of all, let's start at the bottom one. They don't trust the architects of the change. If they don't trust you, it doesn't matter what you want to do because they just don't trust you. So the first thing you have to do is build trust. Trust is not an instantaneous thing. Trust is built over time. So it's going to take time for them to trust you. All right? We're not going to go into great detail about how to do that. It's just, you just need to understand. You've got to build trust before you can do these kinds of things. The next one up, they didn't help create the change. With the changes that you might need to be doing, you need to involve people in the discussion. That doesn't mean that you have to use everybody's ideas, but it does mean you need to get them involved in it. How important is that for millennials? Based on what I said before, way up here, involve them in it. Don't just say, this is what we're doing. Involve them in it. And the more they get involved, the more they're going to support it. They don't perceive the sacrifice to be worth the benefits. You have to clearly define what the benefits are and how you're going to address the sacrifices that have to be given up. And that's different for every single thing that you want to change. What that sacrifice is and how you can help alleviate that sacrifice, if at all possible. Sometimes you can't, but a lot of times you can. And then the top one, you've got to communicate the benefits. If you can't communicate the benefits, then why are you doing the change? Because then, are there any benefits? What are the benefits? Communicate them well. So that's kind of how you handle those 4 things at a very high level. All right, let's move on. Resistance to change. Resistance to change is actually the same, it's an emotional response, and it's the exact same emotional response if someone close to you dies, if you go through a divorce, or anything along those lines. If you think about it, someone close to you dying is a major change. Getting a divorce is a major change. Moving someplace where you lived for 30 years and now you're moving is a major change. They're all changes. The emotions are the same. So I'm going to point out some things to you to help you understand it. First of all, this is a graph. The emotional response, it's an emotional event, is on the left side, the vertical, and the time is on the horizontal. Over time, this is what happens. Being emotional, the lower part of the emotional response is passive, meaning people aren't actively doing anything, they're just kind of in that state. And then you have the active state. The active state means they're doing something. And as we talk through it, you'll understand the difference. So first of all, we start with, everything's good, I'm happy, we're all set, no big deal. That's stability. You introduce change. They go to this inability to act. It's like, I don't know why we're doing this. And there's an inability to act on it. Then there's denial. I don't want to do this. But what's next is anger. I won't do this. All right? Now notice, anger is an active. The first 2 are more passive. I'm kind of internalizing it. Now I'm acting out. Then there's bargaining. Well, I'll try it this time, but then we can go back to the old way. The next is depression. We're not going to go back to the old way, are we? And they're in a depressive state. Notice that depression is a passive state. Then there's testing. Well, I'll try it this once and see what happens. And then there's the acceptance, and guess where we're back? To stability. All right? This is how change works. How long does it take to go through this? It depends is the right answer, okay? Someone like me, that takes about a half a second, all right? Because I love change. If you hate change, that may take you 6 months. That may take you a year. What is your goal? No matter who you're talking to, is to shorten the time frame. They're going to go through this. You want to shorten the time frame as much. So if they're a 6-month person, can you get it down to 3 months? All right, that's huge progress. If they're a 3-month person, can you get it down to 1 month? All right, that's the goal. But as long as you understand this, you can start saying, I know that this person has struggles with change. I'm going to help them through these cycles and just try and reduce the time. That's all you're trying to do. You're not trying to make it instant like it would be for me. You're just trying to reduce it. Okay? By the way, there are some things that I don't like change on, but not very many. So, all right. Brief history of change in the church, okay? Traditional services to contemporary services. Roughly the 1990s. We had that change, didn't we? Okay? Some of you are still in traditional, I get it, but some are in contemporary. German to English. My wife's church in Anaheim, California had German services into the 1980s. All right? Most of you have never been to German service. My dad, when he was a pastor, I asked him about that one time, and he said, well, I didn't know German very good, so I kind of had to write it all out and just basically say the words on the piece of paper. But he quit the German services in the early 40s. He was, I want to be careful here, he was thankful for World War II because it made it easy to get rid of the German. Okay? So, all right? Catholic to Lutheran, and in the 1500s, right? Persecution to Constantine. Think about that. Christians were persecuted. Constantine came around the 300s and made it the official church. All right? So you went from persecution to being the official church. Failure to boldness, approximately 33. All right? Think about that. Ultimate failure. Your leader is killed on a cross, no less. You're going to be branded this terrorist, this person who's out there against everything. And within a short time, they were bolder than virtually anybody else had ever been. Okay? That was significant change. Old Testament to New Testament, approximately year 0. All right? Okay? We'll come back and talk a little bit about these things, but I just wanted you to look at that and think about it. Change has been happening in the church forever, honestly, ever since the beginning of time, okay? This is why change is important. Unless you are prepared to give up something valuable, you will never be able to truly change it all, because you'll be forever in the control of things you can't give up. So let's go back to Old Testament to New Testament, all right? Let's just go back to that slide real quick. Old Testament to New Testament. The Jews had to give up reliance on the law and be faithful to the gospel, the good news of Jesus, the Messiah, all right? They had to give up something to embrace something new. All right, we talked about the failure and the boldness of the disciples. I'm sure the Christians were pretty happy to give up persecution. Some would argue that becoming the state church actually hurt Christianity for other reasons. And we're not going to talk about all that. Catholic to Lutheran, I bet we're all glad that happened, all right? German to English, I'm really glad that happened. I took German in high school, and it's like, I'm glad, right? I'm sure some of you aren't real happy about the top one there, all right? I happen to be very happy about that, but that's me. I like change, okay? So back to that quote. If you are unable, if you can't give up something of value, you cannot change, and that's a key part. Every one of those gave up something of value. Abraham gave up something of value to leave Ur and go to someplace he didn't even know where he was going, all right? We talked about Matthew, the tax collector. But he gave up a lucrative business for something that was much better. He gave up something very valuable for something better, all right? We have all of these examples of Christians that have done that for us, okay? There's a book out there called The Agile Church, all right? It's written to help churches understand how they have to change to reach their neighborhoods. I took a few quotes out of this, so I just want to point out to you, okay? Scholars of innovation observe that in the face of complexity, organizations must have good conversations about assumptions. Continuing on. Christian community cannot be assumed. It must be cultivated intentionally. Those of you that grew up in the 1950s and probably most of the 60s realized that all you needed to do was build a new church in a new suburban neighborhood that was growing up, and you're going to fill that church. Does that work today? Not at all. It's a totally different world, all right? We must cultivate it intentionally. We can't just build it and they will come. We now have to cultivate it intentionally. When assumptions no longer fit where we are today, they must be revised and adapted, which requires holding the life and patterns of our churches lightly enough to change them for the sake of loving our neighbors in Christ. Now, I want to be crystal clear here. This is talking about the life and patterns of our churches lightly enough. It did not say we change the gospel, we change the law. It does not say we change any of those things. Sin and depravity are still all around us. Everybody needs a Savior. Everybody needs the gospel of Jesus. Those things don't change. But the life and patterns around that, the message of how you deliver it, must change to reach the new. All right? So with that in mind, letting a couple people get their pictures, okay? With that in mind, what I want you to do is have, again, 2s or 3s, discuss what assumptions are you making? And I want you to focus around LWML. What assumptions are you making, and what assumptions are holding you back from moving forward? And I'm giving you my first example. Everybody loves a potluck. I don't know about your church, but we don't even bother with potlucks anymore because only 2 things happen. Basically, 60-year-old and older are the only ones who ever come. And if any younger ones come, they're bringing Kentucky Fried Chicken or something from the store. All right? My wife, just the other day, there was someone going to have a potluck, and she said, and she made a nice dish, and she said, I don't know why I worry about, what am I going to make? How good is it going to be? And then I'm the only one that made anything. Everybody else just went and bought something from the store. Why do I worry about it? Which I keep saying, yeah, why do you? I always worry about it. But the point is, potlucks aren't doing the trick anymore. Not in our church. Maybe it works great in yours. But our church, we cannot get people there. We get 20 people in a church that we worship 400 a Sunday. So we just don't do it anymore. It's not worth the time and effort. What assumptions are you making? What assumptions are holding you back? Talk at your table. So we're not going to share these assumptions like we have some of the other things. Those actually can be quite personal, and it's something that I would encourage you to have discussions about back with your groups and just try and understand. But here's the key question that you need to think about and answer. Are you willing to let go of old assumptions and embrace the new ones? All right, think about that question. We're going to continue on here, but that's really the key. Are you willing to let go of old assumptions? All right, we're going to move on. Which one is easier to steer? Which one is easier to steer? The car going down the highway, isn't it? A parked car is really, really hard to steer. Even if you have power steering, it's really, really hard to steer. Why is that? Because it's not moving, right? So how does that relate to change? You got to start. If you're going to sit there and say, we're going to get everything lined up so everything is just perfect, and then we're going to make the change, what's going to happen? Yeah, first of all, you'll never get started because it'll never be perfect. And if you do, it's going to fail. Mike Tyson, one of the great philosophers of our time, made the statement, everybody has a plan until the first punch. All right? Think about that. Everybody has a plan until the first punch. All right? The quicker you can get started, the more you can start figuring out what's working. And now you can make corrections. If you're going down the road at 60 miles an hour, it's easy to make course corrections. All right? If you're parked, you can't make any corrections. All right? And if you're only going 1 mile an hour, it's just really hard to make corrections. You need to start moving. But what's going to happen when you start moving? There's one word that describes it. It is called failure. Anytime we try and change something, we will have failure. And you can look at it as, I'm just such a failure. Or you can look at it as, it's a learning process. I only learn from failure, not from success. Failures are a part of life. If I don't fail, I don't learn. If I don't learn, I'll never change. All right? Failure is one of the most important lessons you can learn from. Success, how many times have you done something that was just a total success, and you're like, great, I wonder why it worked. You know? Isn't that it? It's just like you buy a lottery ticket and you win the lottery. What did you do? You bought a stupid lottery ticket, right? You don't know why you won, okay? When you fail, though, you learn some things. And if you fail multiple times, you learn a lot, and that can lead to success, and now you know why you're successful, all right? Failure is not sin. We talked about it a little bit earlier, at least at our table did. I can't remember if the whole group did. And that was, Jesus was an immense failure. Look how many people he talked to. And I would say many, if not most of them, did not follow him, right? They left him, all right? He was a failure by our standards. He got himself killed. Is that not a huge, colossal failure? But there was a reason behind it, and who learned? Jesus didn't need to learn this lesson, but the disciples did, right? They learned from these failures, and look, they changed the world, right? These failures helped them. And they had failures all along the way, too. They weren't perfect after they got bold. They had many failures along the way, all right? Don't look at failure as sin. It's not sin. Sin is something that you're doing against God. Failure is just an opportunity to learn. And I think that's the next question, or the next answer here. Failure shows us what doesn't work. It shows us what doesn't work. And if we know what doesn't work, we can stop doing it and do something else, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but isn't our society today kind of insulating us from failure?
Yeah.
Competition, trophies, not giving F's in school, doing every, aversion to risk.
And that's why I'm talking today, all right? Failure is good from the point of view of looking at it as learn. Now, you don't want to set out to fail, obviously, but you do want to be trying things because that's how you're going to learn. And you can start making those course corrections. That's the idea here. You can't make a course correction unless you know what doesn't work. And that's what failure allows you to do. So don't look at it as a negative. Look at it as, I learned something today, all right? You never set out to intentionally fail, but learn as you go. That's the point. Let's keep going here. A calm sea never made a skilled mariner. Think about that quote. When I was in college, my brother, I have several older brothers. One of them bought a little two-man sailboat. I can't remember what they were called, but little two-man sailboat. We lived on a lake, so he and I, anytime it was windy, would jump on that boat and go sailing in the summer. All right, it was a lot of fun. Well, one day we see on the beach that the wind is kicking up and coming. And we're like, cool. So we get the boat, we set it all up perpendicular to the wind, and we're like, when this wind hits us, we're just going to fly, right? That wind came, and we just went, all right? We were in the water within a half a second, right? We came up choking and coughing, but we were laughing our heads off because we said, we learned something. Don't have the boat perpendicular to the wind. All right? That's what this quote is trying to say is, if it's always been a calm sea, you're not going to be skilled. In fact, the more windy, blustery days you have, the more skilled you will become. It kind of coincides with failure. It's not saying you're looking for the worst case scenarios, but the more that you have disruptions or things not happening right, you're going to learn a lot more and be able to deal with it better, all right? So again, you want some of this to be happening so that you can be learning more, which means that you're going to have these issues when you go back in and you're trying to reach the millennials in your congregation. You'll learn some things by trying it. But don't be sitting there, if it doesn't work, quit doing it, all right? Do something else. Say, that didn't work, let's try something different. It's okay to try. You might as well try something different, but don't do the same old things. Too often we look at change as a one-time deal, right? We think that, okay, the change is made, we're good to go, I can relax. But really, change is like the Energizer Bunny. It just keeps going and going and going, right? Change is constantly happening around us. To try and fight it, it's a losing battle. There is change. There's always going to be change, okay? So, when I give presentations, one of the things that I always desire out of a presentation is that you can take something away and do something different when you leave. And so that's the next questions. What are the takeaways? What are you going to do? That's that last sheet. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to review some things. And then I want to give you a few minutes to write down some ideas. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of review, and then we'll come back. So, remember, the river has moved. Our society is way different than it was when many of us grew up. All right, and even for your millennials and any iGen that may be in here, when you're our age, it's going to be a whole different society. I have no idea what it's going to look like, but it's going to be different. It won't be the same, okay? The river is moving. The river always keeps moving. We need to figure out how we need to adapt to it. How do we do things going forward? How are we going to change so we can keep with that river? And not be an irrelevant bridge, but be something that can bridge that gap, okay? Next, know that flaming arrows are always going to be coming at you. Especially as Christians, we're going to have flaming arrows coming at us. How can we accept those in a way that we can adapt to them? We know that they're coming, so how can we adapt to that? How can we become somebody who adapts to whatever's thrown at us? For most of us that are in the either Xers or Boomers generation here, millennials and iGen are much different. I think that should be from you rather than you. I can never remember which one's right. What can we do to reach them more effectively? All right. It's important that we reach younger women in the LWML, because without reaching the younger women, and you guys have seen this in churches around the country, if it's only gray hairs in the church, that church is a dying church. You need to have young people to keep that life going, okay? So how can we reach them more effectively? I don't have all the answers to that. I can't sit here and say, do these 3 steps and you've done it. That's a conversation you need to have back in your churches, back in your districts and zones and so forth. What can we do more effectively? And try things out. Understand how others and you react to change. Work on helping people move through this cycle more quickly so that the work can continue to grow, all right? Know that people are different than you, and how they react to change. They may accept it way faster than you. That's a good thing. But how do you help other people move more quickly through it? Christians have been through this before, and we're going to continue to go through these. We aren't unique. Our society changes all the time. Sometimes it feels like it's getting better, sometimes it feels like it's getting worse. But it's always changing, and it always will continue to change. So we just need to understand that. Our churches will be changing. And I can't sit here and say I know exactly the future. I don't know the future. But I do know that it's going to be different than it is today. 10 years from now, if we were meeting here again, we can look back and say, yeah, 10 years ago you said things are going to be different. And we could sit there and say, and this is how it's different. You go through a list. I can't tell you what that list is today. And I won't try to. I'd be wrong. So this to me is a key one that might be from my point of view, it might be the best thing to do is go back and talk with your teams in your churches and say, what are the assumptions that we're making today? And which of those are holding us back? Not all your assumptions are holding you back, but some are, I'm sure. It's always the case. So what can you do to get beyond those? Change those that are holding you back and say, we need to do this differently, all right? And then once you've identified that, sit down with the people you're trying to get involved and say, hey, these are some things that we've been talking about. What do you think? Millennials love to be involved in discussions like that, all right? And don't forget, one of the key points I made with millennials is they want to have an impact on society. Again, what better way than the LWML is their way to impact people not only here but around the world, all right? So how can you make use of that and involve millennials so that they say, this is a cool group that I want to be a part of, all right? They don't tend to like institutions as much, so how can you make that so that they're not a part? You know, I know you're saying Lutheran Women in Mission now rather than the Missionary League, because Missionary League kind of sounds institutional, right? And by saying Lutheran Women in Mission, now it's given it a different tone out there in the world. That's a good thing, all right? It's worth trying that out, seeing how it'll help, okay? Get yourself moving. Try different approaches. You're going to fail, and the quote is, fail early and fail often. The earlier you fail, the cheaper it's going to be, all right? And the more often you fail, the more you learn. Again, you're not trying to fail, but if you don't try to do something, then you're not going to fail. If you don't try to do something, you'll just disappear. You'll become irrelevant, all right? So try something. You're going to fail probably more than half the time. I don't know. You'll fail a significant amount of time, but that's okay. You learn something. Just don't do that again. Do something else, all right? And keep making course corrections until you get there, okay? Accept the fact that change will be with you until you leave this world for heaven. And even then, I bet God has a bunch of stuff going on there, all right? So get used to it. Things are changing. That's not going to stop. The one thing that isn't going to change is that change is, it's going to be there, right? Change is always going to be happening. Accept the fact and figure out, how can I make use of the change? How can I adapt to it? All right? So when you read this title, you know, change is good, you go first, you might have been thinking in terms of, you know, yeah, change is good, you can go first. But you know what? The intent is, change is good, you are the ones that need to lead it. You need to go first. It's not somebody else, it's you. You are the ones that have to be able to make change. You are the ones that are going to have to lead it. And I hope that I gave you some ideas here that'll help you to understand it a bit better and actually do some things with it. With that being said, I want you to just spend a few minutes just writing down ideas that you want to take back, things that you want to take back home, discuss with your teams back home, and maybe you want to discuss them with people here. But that concludes my presentation for today. Thank you very much.